He bowed in silence, as if meditating before a performance. But this was no yoga studio. It was federal court, and the charges were chilling. Sex trafficking, violence, fear. As shocking evidence mounted and his own son released a defiant rap anthem, the courtroom transformed into a battlefield for truth.
The courthouse buzzed with tension as closing arguments began in the high-profile trial of Sean Diddy Combs. Inside, 12 jurors sat on the edge of their seats, pens scribbling, brows furrowed. All eyes were on the defense and prosecution as they prepared to deliver final words in a case that had captivated the nation. Outside, reporters speculated endlessly, some confident he'd walk free, others certain he'd never see freedom again. But inside, it came down to evidence, emotion, and the credibility of voices from the past. That morning, Diddy entered the courtroom in a display that raised more than a few eyebrows. With his palms pressed together in a practiced bow, he greeted each of his 8 attorneys, hands clasped, head slightly dipped, as if in some spiritual ceremony. Observers likened it to a yoga studio ritual, serene and respectful. But for victims watching from afar, it struck a nerve. One courtroom analyst put it bluntly, "Namaste, my rear end." While Diddy played the part of the calm and centered defendant, memories of the graphic testimony still echoed. Dozens of women had come forward. Some described being drugged. Others spoke of waking up in strange hotel rooms, bodies slick with baby oil, unable to remember what had happened. The word freak-offs had become synonymous with horror. The state took no chances. They used their final 5 hours to lay it all bare: pain, fear, power, manipulation. The prosecution's voice was sharp, unwavering, and determined. They knew they couldn't afford mistakes. Then came the defense.
What began as a smooth performance quickly began to unravel. Defense attorney Mark Agnifilo, with his familiar folksy charm, had initially captured the courtroom's attention. His tone was confident, his posture relaxed, and he even managed to draw brief smiles from a few jurors. But beneath the surface, his strategy was dangerous, and it didn't take long before the consequences began to show. He started by defending Combs not as an aggressor, but as a misunderstood man caught in a storm of exaggeration. He said there were 2 trials happening at once, the one built on evidence and the one built on emotion. Then he pivoted, slowly but deliberately, to Cassie Ventura. According to Agnifilo, Cassie was not a victim but a manipulator. He implied that she used her relationship with Combs for personal gain, seducing him, playing mind games, and ultimately walking away with $30 million. She's not a victim. She's a millionaire. The tone shifted. His voice hardened. The charm that had disarmed the jury began to sour into something else: accusation, deflection, character assassination. And then it got worse. He compared Cassie to a Lolita figure, suggesting she lured powerful men, including Combs and others, into her orbit. He painted her as a seductive vixen, rather than someone who had allegedly endured years of abuse. At one point, he even downplayed a now infamous hotel surveillance video, suggesting that what viewers saw as violence was simply the way their relationship was. The room chilled. The prosecution objected, strongly. Maureen Comey, the assistant U.S. attorney, stood up immediately. She leaned to the left, a motion reporters now recognized as her signal of serious intent, and fired off 3 pointed objections. She accused Agnifilo of misleading the jury, minimizing violent assault, and misrepresenting the law. The judge agreed. In a rare move, he delivered a curative instruction, directly telling the jury to ignore specific claims made by the defense. The effect was immediate. Jurors stopped taking notes. Their faces grew stern. Agnifilo returned from the break shaken, his rhythm lost, his words no longer landed with certainty. What was meant to be a powerful rebuttal had turned into a desperate scramble. The defense had crossed the line, and they knew it. After the judge's warning, something changed in the courtroom. The air grew dense with unease. The jurors, once responsive to the defense's charm, now watched with suspicion. It was clear Mark Agnifilo had overplayed his hand. But instead of retreating, he pressed forward, and in doing so may have sealed his client's fate. He returned to the podium with less confidence. Still, he attempted to regain the jury's favor by continuing to poke holes in the credibility of the accusers. He implied that everything boiled down to money. Cassie already got her settlement, he told them. She had no reason to testify, unless this was never about justice. But that argument didn't land. Cassie's civil case had been resolved long before she took the stand. There was no financial incentive left, only a personal one. For many in the room, that detail mattered. Then Agnifilo made a critical mistake. He brought up another woman, identified only as Jane Doe. He referred to her not with sympathy but sarcasm, saying, "She's probably watching this from the house Combs is still paying for." Gasps echoed in the gallery. The line suggested that financial dependence nullified the pain she had described. From there, the tone grew darker. He began to depict Cassie as someone who manipulated men, mentioning her brief involvement with Kid Cudi. He accused her of orchestrating emotional games, buying burner phones to hide her actions. But as he described her, the image he painted didn't match the woman jurors had seen testify, the one who choked back tears while recounting the night she was allegedly beaten on a private jet. The most shocking moment came when Agnifilo referenced the now infamous hotel surveillance video. He told the jury it was unclear what actually happened in the footage, even suggesting Cassie may have been the aggressor. He guided them through the clip frame by frame, trying to spin the narrative. But the jurors didn't buy it. Some leaned back in their seats. Others simply stared at them, eyes narrowed. The damage was done. What had begun as a confident closing argument was now unraveling into disbelief and anger. The jury had seen the video. They had heard the testimony. And now the defense was asking them to unsee, to unfeel, to unremember. As Agnifilo's closing arguments unraveled, he shifted from subtle manipulation to open mockery. His voice, once smooth, turned sharp. He claimed the women weren't victims at all, just opportunists chasing headlines. "It's all about the money," he repeated. "Cassie has 30 million reasons to say what she said." But something about that logic failed to resonate. Jurors had watched Cassie take the stand long after her civil case had settled. If it were about money, what did she stand to gain now, besides reliving public humiliation? The tension spiked when Agnifilo's tone grew colder. He described Cassie as a seductress, hinting that she manipulated every man in her life, Combs, Kid Cudi, even associates in Combs' inner circle. He leaned into outdated tropes, calling her behavior the oldest trick in the book. Some jurors looked visibly uncomfortable. Others stopped writing altogether. Then came the most jarring moment of the day. Out of nowhere, Agnifilo broke into song, crooning a line from Copacabana. Her name was Lola, he sang. The courtroom sat stunned. This wasn't a musical. This was a sex trafficking trial. Observers were aghast. Legal experts watching the live feed couldn't believe it. "What is he doing?" one muttered. "This is disgraceful." Cassie's allegations had included druggings, physical assaults, and emotional terror. To counter that with a show tune felt not only inappropriate, but deliberately cruel. And yet the defense didn't stop there. Agnifilo returned to the surveillance footage from the Intercontinental Hotel. He urged jurors to look again, frame by frame. "Is this abuse?" he asked, "or is it just how they interacted?" He even claimed that Cassie wasn't afraid, that her buying a burner phone to contact Kid Cudi was proof of boldness, not fear. What he didn't mention was that Cassie's friend, a member of Combs' own staff, had advised her to use the burner phone, terrified that if Combs found out she was seeing another man, there'd be consequences. And there were. Not long after, Kid Cudi's car was allegedly firebombed. The suggestion that Cassie had nothing to fear felt detached from reality. The more Agnifilo spoke, the more detached he seemed from the gravity of the moment. By the time court recessed, the question wasn't just whether the jury believed the defense,
It was whether they respected them at all.
While the courtroom struggled to process the defense's behavior, another spectacle unfolded outside. In a move that left legal analysts speechless, Sean Combs' son, Christian, joined by his godfather, Kanye West, released a rap EP in the middle of the trial. One track stood out, bluntly titled Diddy Free. The lyrics weren't just defiant, they were inflammatory. "We ain't sleepin' till we see Diddy free," Christian rapped. "Give me grace, even Nancy." That line, a direct reference to Nancy Grace, echoed across social media. It wasn't just a song, it was a declaration of war against anyone who questioned Combs' innocence. And while it energized fans online, in the courtroom, it raised alarms. Jurors weren't sequestered. They were free to go home each night where they could easily stumble upon the track, now trending on multiple platforms. Defense had no comment. Prosecutors didn't need one. The timing spoke volumes. As reporters dissected the lyrics, they noticed disturbing undertones. Phrases like "Bible might come in handy" and references to Plan B pills sounded less like legal commentary and more like veiled threats or confessions. The track even mocked victims who, according to court testimony, were forced into abortions. "Playing the victim," one line sneered. Back in the courtroom, prosecutors doubled down. They returned to the evidence, the surveillance footage, the testimonies, the patterns of control and abuse. For them, this wasn't a music feud. It was a fight for justice. Legal experts warned that the EP could backfire. What might have been intended as an emotional show of support now looked like witness intimidation, or at least jury tampering by proxy. Why would a defendant's family release a song during closing arguments unless it was part of a strategy? But if it was a strategy, it didn't seem to be working. Inside, the jurors grew quieter, more watchful. The defense looked rattled, and Combs, once relaxed and serene, no longer bowed to his lawyers. His hands were still, but not in peace, in restraint. The trial was no longer just about what had happened behind closed doors. It was about what the world was being told to believe, and whether truth could still survive a microphone, a beat, and a billion-dollar brand.
As the defense continued its closing arguments, one strategy became clear: discredit every accuser. One by one, women were named and dissected, not for the trauma they described, but for how they supposedly behaved before and after it. Cassie Ventura once again became the primary target. D'Agnafilo didn't just question her story, he tried to rewrite it completely. He said Cassie wasn't in fear, using her alleged affair with Kid Cudi as evidence. He told the jury she wasn't hiding, she was scheming. Buying a burner phone, he claimed, proved she had agency, not anxiety. But he conveniently ignored who gave her that idea. Capricorn Clark, a staff member terrified that if Combs found out Cassie was dating someone else, violence would follow. He was right to worry. That same week, someone allegedly firebombed Kid Cudi's car. Still, Agnafilo pushed forward, attempting to portray Cassie not as a survivor, but as the mastermind. She wanted it, he said bluntly. That's how they were. His words were calculated, but his tone turned stomachs. One juror raised an eyebrow. Another leaned away from the bench entirely. By now, few were taking notes. Most were just watching him, stunned. The defense attorney didn't stop there. He argued that the beatings weren't about power or control, but part of their intense relationship. He even claimed that their graphic text exchanges were some of the most beautiful things I've ever read. In another moment, he declared that Cassie and Combs were at their best selves when it came to sex, implying what the prosecution labeled abuse was actually consensual, even loving. It was a chilling distortion of everything the jury had seen and heard. Outside the courthouse, public outrage erupted. Inside, the prosecution waited, taking notes, planning their rebuttal. They knew the defense had walked into dangerous territory. Comparing a documented pattern of violence to a modern love story was more than just tone-deaf, it was offensive. And yet, Combs's legal team seemed convinced that casting doubt on the victims would be enough. As if bruises, trauma, and broken silence could be erased by calling it passion. The jury remained silent, but their eyes spoke volumes.
By the time the defense reached its final stretch, the courtroom had endured hours of contradiction, deflection, and emotional manipulation. But Mark Agnifilo wasn't finished. With the jury watching closely, he tried once more to reframe the narrative, not as a trial about abuse and exploitation, but as the tragic misunderstanding of a passionate romance. He called the relationship between Sean Combs and Cassie Ventura a great modern love story. The room fell silent. Agnifilo described their sexually explicit text messages as some of the most beautiful things he's ever read. He spoke of emotional intensity, of two people who were at their best when they were together. He wanted jurors to see the violence as misguided affection, the control as devotion, the surveillance and isolation as expressions of care. He wasn't just defending Combs, he was romanticizing him. But the jurors had already seen the video. They had watched as Sean Combs chased Cassie down a hallway in a luxury hotel, grabbed her by the neck, dragged her, struck her. They'd heard the testimony of former staff who described the terror in her eyes, the bruises, the silence that followed. One key moment lingered in everyone's mind. On a private jet to Las Vegas, Cassie had screamed through tears, "Can't you see what he's doing to me? Why aren't you doing anything?" And no one moved. Jurors remembered that. Now they were being asked to see it all as love? Prosecutors sat stone-faced, letting the words hang in the air. They didn't need to interrupt. Agnifilo's defense was unraveling in real time. In trying to minimize abuse, he was amplifying it. In trying to explain it away, he was making it unforgettable. Legal analysts watching the trial compared his tactics to psychological gaslighting, inviting jurors to doubt what they had already seen with their own eyes. But the faces on the jury suggested otherwise. There was no nodding, no note-taking, only a heavy, collective silence. The defense had gambled everything on a story of misunderstood affection. But this was not fiction, and this jury didn't look like it had come to court for a love story.
As the defense rested, the prosecution rose one final time. They were entitled to the last word, by law and by weight of evidence. This wasn't just about closing a trial. It was about restoring clarity after hours of distortion. The state had built its case brick by brick, and now they reminded the jury what mattered most. They didn't rely on theatrics, no song, no performance, just facts. They spoke of how sex trafficking begins, not with chains, but with charm. A trafficker doesn't look like a monster at first. He looks like a lover, someone who buys gifts, whispers dreams, makes you feel chosen. And then comes the isolation, the pressure, the demands. And when resistance grows, so does the violence. They reminded the jury of the surveillance footage, of the bruises, of Cassie's testimony, and that unforgettable moment when no one helped her. They played no sympathy card. They didn't have to. The evidence had already spoken. But perhaps the most poignant moment came when a former employee testified, recalling that private jet incident. As Combs allegedly loomed over Cassie, whiskey glass in hand, she had curled into herself, shielding her face. And she said aloud to no one in particular, "Doesn't anyone see what he's doing? Why aren't you doing anything?" The prosecutor paused, then asked the jurors, "Will you be like them? Will you turn your head?" It was a question with no easy answer. For days, the courtroom had been filled with contradictions, legal maneuvers, celebrity defense, and emotional testimony. But now, everything rested with 12 people sworn to seek truth, not popularity. Outside, media lights still flashed, fans still speculated, Songs still dropped. But inside that jury room, there were no cameras, only silence, deliberation, and the heavy responsibility of judgment. Would they see through the bowing and branding? Would they believe the women who broke their silence? Or would they accept a narrative rewritten by money and influence? Verdict watch had begun, and behind those closed doors, justice, at last, was waiting to speak.
Do you believe Diddy's story, or is the evidence too overwhelming? Let us know what you think. Should celebrities be held to a higher standard, or are they protected by power? What would you have done if you were on that jury? Which moment in the trial shocked you the most? Drop your thoughts below. If this story moved you, infuriated you, or opened your eyes, don't stop here. Subscribe for more real stories that matter. Hit the like button to support Survivor Voices, and check out the next episode as we uncover what happens when fame collides with justice.